I have a priest friend who has suffered from depression all of his life, even hospitalized for a time to treat it. I didn't much traffic in people like that when I was young, I am ashamed to say. He brought me down. But his brilliance, combined with his depression, fascinated me. And we have been friends for over 50 years now. I asked him how he defines hope. His response, that I have enough to go on. That I have enough to go on. That I have enough to go on. I think about hope a lot. Loving young people these last 33 years, I've worked with way too many students who thought they had no hope. And they're not alone. The suicide rate in our country continues to climb across every age group. How could I not think about hope? I have been wrong about many things in my life. I have been very wrong about hope. I thought hope was something that came from the outside. For me, wrong. I thought hope was an act of the will, all about willpower. Wrong. I thought that hope was all about the future, tomorrow. Wrong. I thought hope was tied to outcomes, things going my way. Wrong. I thought hope was a synonym for optimism. Wrong again. Things like resilience, forgiveness, trust, courage, commitment are not the fruits of hope, but the wellspring of hope. And the route by which we, you and I, find our way, orient ourselves to that mysterious interior replenishment we call hope. That mysterious interior replenishment we call hope. In the light of the teachings of our church, our scriptures, my personal experience, and everything included on this Easter morning and for the next 50 days, unpacking it all, I know now that hope is one of the theological virtues, along with love and faith, that means it's a given. That it's a given in our lives, a gift given in the act of creation. And I don't have to earn it, I don't have to merit it, I don't have to deserve it, I don't have to do all the right things to be hopeful, full of hope. It's there from the beginning. What's more, it's a gift everybody has been given without exception. I don't have to beg for it. I just have to trust. Trust that it's in me, that it's in you already. I know now that naming that and claiming that releases it like a fountainhead, a wellspring, rising up from within us, not coming from outside of us, but rising up within us, hope does, that manifests in action and in longing. I know now that hope is a courageous trust, that life is enough to go on and to go on. Life is enough to go on. That it's an openness to surprise, even when we are the most down, to be open to surprise. And the future does not come later, Rather, the seeds of our future are always and only right here, right now. I could not be more grateful for the timing of Easter. In the wake of all the world has been battered with during these last 2 decades, starting with September 11th, the global pandemic, undeniably accelerating climate change, increasingly polarized and violent national politics, our churches too, economic uncertainty, and those sky-rising suicide rates. People are more than ever echoing the great words of the Old Testament prophet, "Lord, what is there to hope for?" In the midst of a decade like this, what is there to hope for? When we clear the deck of illusory hope, we come upon miracle of miracles. At the root of our being, a wellspring of life, bubbling up as mysterious infusion of strength and of joy. It's not illusory. It is not fragile. It is not contingent on anything. It's not destructible. It's already awaiting only my homecoming. And that homecoming is where we are headed these next 50 days of Easter straight away. The traumatized legacy of the past 2 decades will necessarily add a new element of urgency. Hope has become a necessity. It is the one quality that can lead us beyond fear, beyond despair, to that true wellspring of new beginnings, both for our own lives and for our world. We want things to get better in the future, but the truth is, in the immediate future, they just might not. Our happiness is never contingent on circumstances outside of ourselves. Let me say that again. Our happiness should never be contingent on circumstances outside of ourselves. Hope can only come from within, and if external circumstances determine the state of our being, we are ceding it away. We're ceding our happiness away at the outset. The one true power we actually have, but when we claim that power, our connection to a deeper kind of hope is instantly restored. Otherwise, where does that leave us? In our own lives. When the biopsy comes back malignant, when despite our deepest and fervent prayers, healing does not occur, when there's no miraculous intervention. Not only is the situation completely hopeless, but now it appears God has abandoned us as well. And our hope was misplaced. As a priest, over these last 47 years, I saw way too often the wreckage of those whose faith died along with their loved one. It is a painful and unnecessary tragedy. I'm talking about another kind of hope that quietly weaves its way in a different direction. Listen to the ancient prophet Habakkuk, who describes his circumstance, his situation, and the situation of his people. It's about as bad as it gets. No crops, no flocks, no food. A likely sentence of starvation in the semi-desert, arid land. But Habakkuk responds to all that with joy, and with strength. Not only does he keep the faith, his faith does not sound like anything like a dreary, stoic sort of endurance. The prophet speaks from a sort of lightness that seems to come flooding in upon him in the midst of these dire circumstances. This lightness that seems to come flooding upon him despite the seeming hopelessness of his situation. There's a spring in his step, the feet of the deer, he calls it. And his path leads upward into the heights. In the title of a wonderful little book I'm sure most of you have heard about or read maybe, he seems to be speaking of an unbearable lightness of being. I have some of what the prophet's talking about in my own experience. A similar sort of dramatic reversal in which hope seems to pour into me, or maybe it wells up inside of me. It's totally indifferent to the circumstances, the outer circumstances. It was for me in that first year of COVID. For me, as a relatively affectionate kind of guy, a guy who loves to hug, and an extroverted kind of guy who loves to talk, and who loves being immersed in community all the time and thrive on it. As the circumstances became more dire and too much was unknown, my anxiety was rising like the sea. I was scared for me. People were scared for me. Most of what I loved about life was gone, and Zooming was primitive. All the scenes freezing here and there and disappearing from the screen. It was just one disappointment after the other for me, and I'm sure for most all of us. But then, this most extraordinary thing happened. As I huddled in my room across the street, really anxious and lost in how the CSC should respond, while the Archdiocese was saying one thing, and WashU was saying another thing, and the city and the county were saying another thing, and we're trying to decide how to have masses for students when they couldn't even come over. We didn't know what to do. It was intense. It was crazy. Any of the staff could echo that who was there at the time. Suddenly, in the midst of all that, I could feel this sort of strange lightness and joy that came over me. It started to bubble up from inside of me, almost maybe like a glass empty being filled with champagne. Make no mistake about it, this was not a mood shift, and the circumstances still were not promising, but it was more like a physical sensation and enough to go on. Enough to go on. It was as if I had been recharged, filled with an energy so buoyant, it couldn't sync with me what was happening with this on the inside of me. I didn't know what to do with it. I found myself suddenly scooped up into the heights. Even my feet upstairs in my room started dancing. And then I noticed it. I said, I'm dancing. What the hell? Those moments, that moment, became my most important guidepost to the real well springs of hope. And I still feel like I'm only beginning to unpack what I had grasped in those seconds, those first days. But I see now, I know now, that hope is not really an emotion. It's more of a sensation. And I have followed this small thread ever since. It has led me to some very rich spiritual terrain. Have you ever experienced one of those sudden inner wind shifts where in the midst of outer and inner chaos, you suddenly felt filled with an almost invincibility? What did you attribute it to? Did anything shift in your outer world as well? Friday night, Good Friday, the cross, that cross, was our symbol of sacrifice, our totem. This Easter morning, our symbol of hope is an anchor. Let me share a quote from one of our Quaker friends. Hold fast to the hope that anchors the soul, that is sure and steadfast, that you may float above the world's seas. And this from Pope Francis just this past couple weeks. It is best to not confuse optimism with hope. Optimism is a psychological attitude towards life. Hope goes further. It is an anchor, he said, an anchor that hurls towards the future. It is what you let you pull on the line and reach what you're aiming for and head in the right direction. This last winter, I had the occasion to sail on the biggest sailboat I'd ever seen. And I found myself fascinated of all things by the anchor of this boat that holds us in place out there. Something that sounds like dead weight, an anchor, something that drags you down, right? But it actually provides something very different, it does, like hope. Well, what I learned from the captain of the ship was that the anchor is something you carry on the ship, part of your own equipment. You don't go up to it and tie onto it and let it carry you like that. You carry it along with you into the deep, in your ship's hold, like hope. Like hope is stored in the hold of our own being. We carry it with us all the time, hope we do. I learned an anchor keeps us from running aground or onto the rocks. They stay put. And we are no longer at the mercy of treacherous winds and currents carrying us towards shipwreck. It becomes a tether between you and the firmer ground beneath you, holding you secure from a deeper and more solid place. And I learned that it keeps us afloat. It doesn't take you out of the water, but always you to remain there with a measure of equanimity and control. You're still in the game, but now you are literally floating above the world's seas. And when the storm subsides, you're free to resume your course. My friends, there's an anchor in our souls that will not pass away, that will not die. And if you take the world's seas as a symbol of the treacherous, ever-shifting currents of our world, putting down an anchor suggests tethering yourself to the bedrock, the solid, divine bedrock of a stronger, more trustworthy reality. The bedrock would be love, the love of God in Christ. And we sink our anchor into something that's that solid and allows us to stand strong against the transient and dangerous conditions here so that we can ride out the storm. My friends, the journey to the well springs of hope is really a journey to the center, towards these innermost well springs of our being, where we meet and are met by God. Easter is the feast of hope. With everything going so wrong the last 2 decades, we're not going to hell in a handbasket. I'm putting all my Easter eggs in God's Easter basket. I'm putting my money on Jesus and his wisdom and his way. If you do, see if it doesn't make you feel somewhat lighter. As my priest friend said, and I give him the last word, from a wisdom born of terrible suffering, hope means I know I have enough to go on. To go on. We all do.